Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the webinar Communication for Future-Proof Leadership. The webinar is organized by the Danish Communication Association in collaboration with Global Alliance and is part of the Ethic First theme months. Just to talk about what is the purpose of Ethic First months. Well, it's about to strengthen ethical judgment, accountability, and trust building in modern communication practice by helping professionals to navigate complexity, power, and emerging risks together. And that's what this webinar is all about. My name is Anders Scholl, and together with me, I'm delighted to welcome Maliha Akil and Pelle Nilsson. Maliha, please introduce yourself and let me know, or let us know, what makes you excited about today's topic.
Hey, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm the founder and CEO of the Ideas Collective here in Toronto, Canada, and I'm a board member of the Global Alliance as well. And I have been in communication and marketing fields for almost 20 years. And I have seen a lot of trends come and go, and a lot of advice come and go. Some stayed longer. And so for me, what's exciting about this topic is the idea of future proof. And is that really what we should be focused on, or if we need to go back to basics in everything that we do?
Thank you, Maliha. Yeah, let's talk about that later. And Pelle, welcome to you as well. What makes you excited about today's session?
Thank you, Anders, and thank you for having me on this webinar. I find this webinar and the topic extremely exciting and extremely relevant. I am a communications consultant. We're both working in agencies, but also in large-scale companies. And together with that, I'm the chairperson of the Danish Association of Communicators. It's been years since communicators entered the power room of companies and in politics. But I always felt that we sort of needed to highlight the professional ethics of what we are actually doing and what we are contributing with, both to our companies, clients, customers, but also to the society. So having this debate about the future leadership in this world and how we as professionals can support that is extremely relevant and interesting.
Thank you, Pelle. And let's just take a look at the agenda for the webinar. So we'll start setting the scene, building the big picture, the state of the world. Then we will touch upon specific leadership skills for the future and what we as communicators need to do differently in order to support that change. And then in the end, we will come up with inspiration for how communicators can build future-proof leadership in their organizations. Of course, there will also be time for questions and of course also use the chat if you have comments or links to share or perspectives, because this is something where everyone can contribute. So let's start by setting the scene, and let's take a look at the global risks facing societies and organizations. Back in January, the World Economic Forum, they published their global risk report. And for the third year in a row, mis and disinformation was mentioned as a top risk, this year only surpassed by geoeconomic confrontation. When we then look at long-term risk, there's a lot of climate change risk, biodiversity risk, but also, again, mis and disinformation and adverse outcomes of AI technologies. So these are the overall risk facing society according to the World Economic Forum. If we then take a look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, they now conclude that the mistrust in the world has led to insularity, which also means that we are reluctant to trust anyone who are different from us. Then the question is, of course, how does that influence leadership? And the conclusion from the Forum of Young Global Leaders are clear. Leadership today is not future-proof, and in many cases not even present-proof. Leadership models that were built on stability and hierarchy is no longer valid in today's world marked by constant transformation, increasing acceleration, and complex interdependencies. And the Young Forum of Leaders, they conclude that trust, or the erosion of trust in leaders and institutions worldwide, is not the cause. It is a symptom of a more profound crisis. Leadership has simply failed to evolve. So this is the state of the world, at least seen in the lens of World Economic Forum and the Forum of Young Global Leaders. So Maliha, let me hear, do you share this perspective, or what is your view of the state of the world?
I think I share the perspective partially. And the reason I mentioned that is, so I am currently doing my doctorate, and my topic relates to social purpose. And one of the debates that's happening in the social purpose space is the idea of the role of corporations in society. And you have the traditional view where corporations exist to maximize profit for shareholders or value for shareholders. But then there's the purpose-driven view, which is that corporations and society's relationship is interconnected, and you can't have well-being in one without the other. And so corporations need to really think about how do you maximize value for all stakeholders and not just your shareholders. But the challenge is, yes, the leadership traits and how leadership is developed is still very much that old way, the hierarchy that the report mentions. But the one thing that was missing for me is the idea of incentives, because executives are incentivized to deliver profits for shareholders, and they're incentivized to deliver growth in the short term. So unless we change that thinking from the short term to a more long-term view, we're not really going to see the leadership changes that we would look for, because there's no reason to change. If you're being evaluated based on share price, based on growth numbers, and quarterly reporting, why would any leader want to look long term? And so I feel like that's where sometimes for me the missing gap is in these conversations, that we're looking at the surface, but we're not necessarily seeing all of the things that are happening inside the ecosystem. And a huge part of my doctorate, when I was doing a lot of my independent study and readings on social purpose, the debate is very much around we need to change the ecosystem in which organizations operate. And we need to have a much more clear and profound understanding about how societal and economic well-being are so interlinked together. And then look at all of these systems that are in place, like incentives, leadership development, what it really means to be a leader. What does future proof mean? Like, we need to look at all of these systems in order to then truly transform the way that our business and environments operate.
Thank you, Malihat. So as I understand you, you agree that there is a need for a change, but what you say, it's more than just leadership skills, it's structural changes that is needed.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Pele, what is your view?
Well, I think it's a very big question, actually, and I think there's so many things up in the air. These years, and personally, I think I'm going from being quite depressed about what's happening in the world, and then next hour maybe more optimistic. But one thing is certain: there's many things at stake at these years, and I remember reading Giuliano Impoli's book. I don't know if you know it, the Time of the Predators. That was just sort of describing a world where everything just was left over for the predators to eat, and in a way, this is also what we've been seeing. Maybe a lot of things are happening in the global world where we see this. But I must say that I'm also a little bit, from time to time, optimistic, because I also see a counter reaction to this. And I think that maybe some of these predators, what they are actually doing is they are sort of uh, they're rocking the boat. But I also see a lot of people reacting to this and realizing that we cannot have a world without more stability, without some rules, without a more sustainable way of interacting in the world. And that makes me quite optimistic. I think that I think the report from Young Leaders Forum at World Economic Forum is an example of this. I mean, young people, they realize that there's something rotten in the world, and it cannot continue to function this way. And I also see that among business leaders. I mean, all my own clients, they are thinking this way, that this is not good for anybody. It's not good for the businesses, not good for the people working there. It's not good for their business partners around the world. Nobody wants this situation that we have right now, actually. So that makes me optimistic. And then I would say, yeah, I'm I really agree that what we need to do is sort of to look further ahead and say, we cannot just think short term. We need to think more long term. We need to build systems. We need to build capabilities. And then I would like to add to that list, that's just about systems. It's also actually about attitudes. So in that sense, I agree with Maliha. I mean, this is not only about skills. This is basically about attitudes. This is about ethics. It's about values. It's about who we are as people in the world, and we want to bring back to the world.
Thank you for that optimistic view, Pelle. I think
I'm in that corner right now.
but that's
It
good.
can change in 10 minutes.
But that's important. And of course, there might be a lot of things that need to be changed in this world. In this webinar, we will try to focus on the leadership skills for the future and how communicators can contribute. Because what strikes me when I see the skills from the Young Leaders Forum is that the six highest ranks are moral compass, empathy and the ability to build trust, vision and storytelling, resilience and tolerance for failure, foresight and future preparedness, and finally, the ability to engage a wide and varied set of stakeholders. And when I look at these skills, it seems like it's a lot of skills that we as communicators are qualified in. So we actually have an opportunity, but maybe also obligation to strengthen those skills within the organizations. So, Maliha, when you look at these skills also as a professional communicator, where do you see that communicators actually can help build these leadership skills?
For me, communicators can help enable all of them. But I think where we play the strongest role would be around vision and storytelling and empathy and the ability to build trust. And I say that because those are two core skills where we have a greater role in how our leaders come across to different stakeholders. And so when I think about empathy and the ability to build trust, if you're doing executive communication and you are writing on behalf of executives, you are taking their words and making and writing them or communicating them in a way that should build trust among employees, should build trust among shareholders and other community members. You need to present the empathy in a way that feels genuine, because when you don't do that well, everyone can tell that you're not being genuine. And part of it is, if we go back to leaders themselves, if leaders don't have empathy, if they are not known for their ability to connect with stakeholders, I think even the best communication can fail because there's a disconnect between what the leader actually is versus what you're communicating on their behalf. So I think as communicators, that's why I feel like I said we can enable a lot, because we also are in a position to coach our leaders on their communication skills, but more importantly, on some of their leadership skills, like how do they come across, because we can be the voice of the organization for them. In marketing, we often talk about the voice of the customer type programs and surveys. I think for communication, particularly people that are working in internal communication, employee engagement, they can be the voice of the employees, the voice of the organization to their leaders. On the storytelling part, that's a really interesting one, because in recent months, we've started to see a lot of job descriptions come out for communication where one of the key skills that they ask for is storytelling. And interestingly enough, the AI companies are one of the big ones asking for that skill, because if you look at, I think it was Claude or Anthropic and OpenAI both have had job descriptions open for their communication function. And even some of the titles, they're putting storyteller in the title, because storytelling has always been a human capability. If we look at stories from time immemorial, we look at even things that came out of the Middle Ages, like everything was about human storytelling. That's how humans communicated with each other. We told stories. We told stories around the fireplace. We told stories that went down through generations. And so that's one thing that if you look at even AI companies wanting humans to tell stories, it just tells you that storytelling for a comms professional needs to be the table stakes, because that is something that we are good at. And we need to own how good we are at it so that we can position ourselves as being the chief storyteller for our organizations.
Thank you, Maliha. And good to know that there are skills that can't that AI can't compete with. Pelle, what strikes you when you look at these skills?
Well, of course, first of all, when it's described as the most important leadership skills, I think it seems as if we will have a lot to do as professional communicators when we are trying to help the future leaders in how to do this, because a lot of this has, of course, to do with communication in its essence. I mean, my reflection is that we play certain roles as communicators, and they are quite well established. I mean, we produce things, we act as gatekeepers towards media, but also towards what goes on into our corporate platforms in total. We make strategies that sort of where we try to figure out how to establish a great position, a good narrative for our companies, our clients, and then we act as advisors for our leaders, very oftenly our top leaders and our top leaders' teams. And by doing this, we already exercise a lot of power. And I think what many communicators haven't really embodied is that what we do as communicator is exercising power on behalf of our company on a daily basis. And certainly we do it by supporting all these leadership skills. But actually, in the essence, I really want us to think about how do we then contribute to the more long-term perspective that we were talking about before, because we can do this in a way where we actually cannibalize on further on the trust, the erosion of trust. I mean, if we should be self-critical towards our profession, is that we have contributed building the world that we see today with a lot of distrust. By not taking this power upon us to say, no, we shouldn't do that. We should be the guardians of building better societies, more sustainable societies, working with trust and legitimacy and the long-term license to operate. And that is where I see that we actually contribute mostly to the overall strategic business agenda to the company, that in this essence, by thinking long-term, by helping our leaders to actually do what they say in number 5 and 6 here, to foresee the future and to build strong long-term relationships with customers, clients, communities, etc., we help secure the long-term license to operate for our companies and the ability to continue growing.
If I could just,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, Pelle, continue. I'll add in.
No, it's fine. Good.
Now, as you were talking, I was thinking, like, the slide says most important leadership skills, but really these are also skills that we as communication professionals need to have longevity in our careers. Because if we are not practicing communication ethically, and the distrust piece comes into it, because we have certainly seen
Exactly.
within communication, sometimes like we can be the ones who are behind the wrong messages going out.
Exactly.
And so, for ourselves, we need to also remind ourselves that these leadership skills aren't necessarily for our leaders. These are also skills that we ourselves as comms professionals need to cultivate, to develop if we don't have it, and need to develop them equally. Because if we want to have longevity in our career, we can't rely only on vision and storytelling. We need to be resilient ourselves. We need to have the foresight to think about where our profession is going so that we can evolve and adapt as things change. And we ourselves, like we already have engaged with a wide range of stakeholders, no matter what role we're in, external, internal, it doesn't matter. We already engage with a variety of stakeholders. So we need to make sure that all of these skills collectively are the most important skills for communication professionals. Even if you're starting out in your career or you're in a leadership role yourself in comms, you still need to be developing these skills for yourself and not necessarily for other people or expecting other people in the organization to have them solely.
And if we look at the skills, number 1 is moral compass.
Mm-hmm.
So is that an area where we say, well, we can actually contribute on that, or is it more something where we need help from other disciplines? I know, Pelle, that in the Danish communication associations, we have worked on a moral compass for communicators. Is that something that you can see could be used more broadly to help building moral compass for leaders?
Okay, so a few comments on that. If I should be a little bit critical to the wording and talk about moral compass, is that is very individualized. So moral has to do with you as a single person using your own moral compass to navigate in the world. But what we've been working on is, I think, what we're saying is that if we want to change the way and adjust the way that we work as communicators, as professional communicators, and to support the communication that comes out of our municipalities, our companies, our politicians, it cannot only be an individual responsibility. This needs to be more like a collective set of ethical standards that we as a profession supports. And it also needs a lot of empowerment around a lot of communicators, because it's not enough that we sometimes, as a single communicator, walks into the senior managers, and we might have a very, a moral compass based on solid, solid morals, but we are often in a power situation that leaves us with maybe just doing what is said by the senior managers. So I think we need more support. And yes, then we've been working on some of the fundamentals for an ethical compass. But the end aim is not to have the compass itself. It's an enabler to empower professional communicators to be more ethical in the way that we practice our profession on a daily basis. So it's a support tool. It's not an end tool.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would say, like with IABC has the code of ethics for all of its members. And the code of ethics essentially defines that moral compass, for lack of a better term, for people who practice the profession and are members of the association. The Global Alliance has the responsible AI principles, and we also have our position on what is responsible communication. So, I agree with Pele, like morality can sometimes be very individualized and our values are very personal. And also in different parts of the world, they translate differently. I grew up in UAE, and so I started my career there as well. And there are a lot of differences in how people approach things in that part of the world versus in North America. And there are commonalities, but I think a lot of like the values can be cultural as well. So I think we have to be very careful that we're not always telling people in different parts of the world that we're not familiar with on what is the value or morals that they need to follow. But I think ethics is one thing that isn't necessarily up for interpretation, because it's in, and particularly when you have things like the code of ethics or the responsible communication principles, etc., they are meant to be guidelines to help you frame what you're doing. They're not prescriptive that you must do this. They're more about framing how the communication function needs to be effective in what it does and contribute positively to the organizations and hopefully to society and the license to operate that Pele talked about. And also just recognizing that there will always be distrust, mistrust. But if we are contributing positively as communication professionals and we're leveraging the skills that we see up in on the screen and in this report, then we are doing things to the best of our abilities to do our jobs well.
Yeah. So in essence, I agree with all what you are saying, but since this is a conversation, I will try to take the standpoint of the report and saying there must be a reason why they have picked moral compass as number one skill, and maybe it's something people are lacking or something that really is needed. And there could be two reasons for that. One of them can be that we are living in a world of complexity. You don't have a truth about, if you go in this direction, then you will get that. So, what do you base your decisions on as a leader when you don't have full oversight of what is known? And maybe the moral compass will guide you because it will also, as you mentioned earlier on, lead you to what is beneficial for the long term. We also talked about earlier on, is this about future-proof leadership, about leadership skills that are new, or is it actually something, I think, Maliha, you talked about going back to the basics. And I just thought about that also, and actually, Adam Smith, the founder of capitalism, you can say, he actually wrote the theory of moral sentiments 20 years before the Wealth of Nations. And his argument is that you cannot have a well-functioning market if you don't have trust in the other people there. So moral sentiments is linked to the trust in each other and hereby also the trust in the way that we are organized as a world. So good business is actually about having a clear moral compass.
And I would say, like, good business is also about recognizing that business doesn't exist in a vacuum. I talked about that interconnectedness between economic and societal well-being. And when we look at what the world was like during Adam Smith's time, companies' role was to function as the social welfare enablement. The idea of, welfare states didn't necessarily exist in those days. And a lot of the companies at that time, one of their core responsibilities was to ensure that a lot of the social infrastructure was being paid for by the company, not always by the government. And this was different in different parts of the world. But there was some reading that I did a while back where it talked about how companies in the 1700s, 1600s were the ones that were responsible for social well-being and for social causes, for contributing charitably, because you didn't necessarily have the government infrastructure to do it. And it's during industrialization where true capitalism came about, where it was about maximization of resources. And at that point is when companies stop seeing their role as being crucial to society. And there's a disconnect that happened. And so that's why the discourse in the purpose space is very much about re-looking at the role of companies in society, of corporations in society, and asking ourselves, like, can we go back to the basics? Because there was a time when that was the role of corporations in society, was to help elevate society, because companies rely on society to provide resources. Those could be people, those could be actual extractive resources, it could be anything else. But they rely on society to provide them everything they need to operate. If those things went away, companies could not exist anymore because they would have no resources that they could tap on. So I think, like, it's always interesting. I mean, I will admit I've always been a hardcore capitalist, and that even in the purpose space has not changed for me, because what I see is capitalism provides you with an infrastructure, but if you need to layer it on with the basics of having a social purpose and recognizing that your role in society is very much interconnected, society gives you, as a corporation, the license to operate. And if that license went away, then you as a company can't operate. And so it's not about, one is better than the other. It's about how do we learn to coexist. And when we bring it back to the role of communication professionals, our job is to help our companies realize all of these truths, but also help them tell that story well. Because I do think there's a lot of companies doing amazing work. We may just not always hear about it. And if we're not hearing about it, I think we have to ask ourselves as communication professionals, are we telling the stories of our companies well? Are we telling them in the right channels? Are we telling them to the right people? Because if we're not doing that, then we're not doing our jobs well, and we are contributing to a concept of what companies do and don't do for us. So I think there is definitely a role that we can play in that as well.
Thank you, Maliha. And that's a great segue to the next topic, talking about what are we as communicators supposed to do, and potentially what do we need to change in how we in what we do today in order to support that change to future-proof
Mm.
leadership. Pele, what is your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, going back to what I said, I mean, Paul Watzlawick, he said many years ago that you cannot not communicate, and if we add to that we exercise power every time we communicate, it means that we cannot go to work as communicators without exercising power. And I think we need to lean into this and take real responsibility for the power that we exercise or co-exercise with other people in our organizations. That means we have a responsibility for doing what Malia and you were talking about, Anders, that how do we see that our businesses, but I also like our organizations, our governments, I mean, how can we help them come back on a track where we see that trust are beginning to be rebuilt. Legitimacy is going to be rebuilt, that we can cooperate and coexist in this world without it being a power game, but something where we actually want to build something better together. One thing that I just reflected on when we were talking about Adam Smith and the early capitalism is that looking back 10, 15 years ago, we actually did see a lot of idealism in the world. And I'm not talking, I don't have the same experience as you, Maliha, from many parts of the world, but at least in the Scandinavian companies, we saw that, I mean, they were way ahead of governments when it came to implementing ways to work with sustainability and the green agenda. But it wasn't because they were more idealistic. First of all, it was because it fitted nicely into their business model. Yeah, we want to build a sustainable company that will be here in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So of course we can just as well start working on these agendas as well.
Yeah.
And I think this is important, and I think this is where we can play a huge role. I think that of course, we can exercise and help our companies in all the 4 roles I described before. But I think that mainly, I mean, the biggest potential is when we have access to top management and act as advisors for them, to remind them about the more long-term perspectives in our businesses, to build narratives that goes way back in time, but are also visionary, looking 5, 10 years ahead. Realizing that maybe the years that we see right now where we see all the problems in the world with the wars and conflicts and geopolitical issues, etc., that too will pass. I mean, and there will also be something on the other side of this, so that we also, when we work with our narratives in our companies, are not solo focusing on all the crises that we need to solve, but that we also build on the visions. I mean, the purpose, that why are we here, and what future can we help to build together for our business and our societies. And I think that is important to balance this agenda.
And I think, sorry, you can't be sustainable if you don't have that long-term view. And I think part of it is leaving your ego at the door. Like even for CEOs, like you may not be around when the company achieves the vision that you set out to achieve, and you need to be okay with that. And same for communication. I might set the strategy, but I might not be there in 5, 10 years to see the final version. And I have to be okay with that. And I have to be okay with not taking the kudos for when it comes together. And I think that part of long-termism is recognizing that you may not be the one that gets the credit, and that's okay. Because at
I
the end of
agree.
the day, the long term is more important than what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
And of
So
course,
to
it would be great if we could use our role as advisors to convince CEOs that they should look for the long term, they should look at the legacy, etc. I'm sure that some of the people listening in might not find that easy to go to the CEO and convince them of that, but it seems like that is really something we should work on. In a few minutes, we will start the Q&A. We already have one question from Karl-Heinz Pockner that is linked to a question that I also want to share with you, because he talks about leadership as more than top leaders. He sees it as the organizational
yeah.
leadership, which also means that if we are as communicators to build future-proof leadership, it's not enough that we try to educate the leaders of today, but we actually have to build the capability as an organization. And as I see, that's often something we are not good at. We leave that to the HR or people and organization function and others. So how could we actually make sure that we step in and build capabilities, and is not only sitting next to the CEO and giving him or her advice? Do you have a take on that, Malia?
Yes, I think it's really important to partner because we aren't able to do all of this ourselves. And so we have to learn to partner with HR, with IT, with finance, whatever the right function is, and sometimes with all of them. Like we have to, and we have to partner, but we could also convene. We can convene those functions together around the shared goal, and therefore have a role in proactively advancing the capability building that's needed. I'd mentioned at the start of our webinar, like I have an issue sometimes with the word future proof, because as soon as you say future proof, like 5 years later, it's already outdated. Like, what does that even mean, right? And because capabilities are ever evolving, they are contextual based on your organization, based on the country in which you're operating. So I think we need to really ask ourselves, like, do we want things to be future proof or do we want them to be fit for purpose? Because if future proof means there is an inevitable deadline by when we need to meet them. But we all know, like, the leadership capabilities of 10 years ago do not apply today, or some of them don't. So, but back 10 years ago, people were calling them future proof. And, so I think in that way, when we are partnering with others, we allow ourselves to listen to all of these different viewpoints and their perspectives on what are the right capabilities for the organization and not do it in a vacuum. So I feel like our role is to be the dot connector, the convener, with all of these different functions. And that way we show that we are all working towards a common goal. And it's not about our ego that comms did this. It's about the organization doing something together.
Mhm. Thank you so much. Uh,
Yeah,
you have
I
something?
yeah, I would like to add a little bit to that. Uh, so so what we can do to support the leadership that we want in the organization is also to realize that what we are supporting here is a certain set of leadership communication in the organization. And there's actually a lot we can do that is quite tangible and and things that we've been working on for years and years, actually. So some of this has to do with the values connected to communication, that we don't lie, uh, that we want transparency in the way we communicate, that we rather have a dialogue and conversations rather than one-way communication, etc., etc. Something that is often anchored in the communications policy. So if you're in an organization or company that doesn't have that already, this is a way to start. Another thing is to see ourselves as not maybe someone who only train leaders in presentation skills and formulate communication packages for the leaders, but also support and facilitate where people can meet in the organization, uh, internally, leaders, employees, and have conversations on regular basis on important topics. Uh, Again, not going there to seeing this as a top-down show with the CEO, but where we actually have conversations with each other internally. And it also comes back to something as simple as communication tools. I mean, build tools that allow leaders to actually enter into dialogue with each other, with their people. I mean, a lot of companies today don't even have internal social media.
Mhm.
I mean, in a way, it's ridiculous that the rest of the world has been communicating like crazy on social media for 15 years. And a lot of the Fortune 500 companies, they don't even have that today. They might have an intranet where people can read an article about something. I mean, it's so old fashioned. That is, this is not the leadership that we want. Leadership by articles on intranet. Come on. I mean, it's like the Stone Ages, isn't it? So I just say there's actually a lot that we can do to facilitate the right leadership communication culture in our companies.
Thank you. Now it's time if people who are listening in have questions, please type them in the chat or in the Q&A. And then let's just use a few minutes and continue on what you just did, Pelle, talking about concrete examples of what can people do. And I've also in the chat just included a link to a white paper we were writing with a number of of activities and tools and concepts that could be useful. Maliha, if you should share, something concrete that a communicator who are listening in could do tomorrow, what would that be?
I think one thing would be to ask yourselves if you were the one on the receiving end of that communication, what would you want it to be? I think we as communicators do forget that we are the employees of that organization too. And we may be responsible for developing the communication strategy and for executing it, but we are also on the receiving end of it. So if we're not asking ourselves, what would I like to see? What would I like to feel? Then I think there's a disconnect because we're not thinking like employees too. And so you may want to start with yourself as the employee, layer that on to the job that you have to do, but really ask yourselves, if I was on the receiving end of this communication, if I was to bring this culture to life, what would it look like for me? It sounds simple, but it's actually like it requires a lot of self-awareness. And I often was frustrated when I worked in-house because I didn't see my colleagues thinking of themselves as the end consumers of that communication. It was like, I need to send out this email, I need to send out this newsletter, or to Pele's example, I need to post on the intranet. But you don't ask yourself, like, is that what I want as an employee? Like, and if you start with that self-awareness, I think everything else follows. But just to ask yourself that question every time you start any new communication project and see how much simpler it gets to actually communicate. Because now you know what to expect, what to feel, what to think.
So to look at the leadership skills about empathy, it's actually also about, taking
Mhm.
them upon ourselves and live
Mm.
those. Uh,
Yeah.
we just got a comment talking about that visibility, partnership, and transparency,
Mm.
amongst others, should be our watchwords or practice
Hmm.
communication. I
I
fully,
agree.
fully agree on that. Uh,
Yeah. Can I add just a few comments to that? Because, I mean, one thing that we can do is to realize that the number one public communication challenge that we have these years is legitimacy and to build trust. And we can ask ourselves, how do we actually rebuild trust? Well, we need then to be extremely transparent. And to be transparent, what does that take? Well, it takes vulnerability. So we should actually teach our leaders to be more vulnerable and transparent, and also to engage more in dialogue, meaning, and the biggest gap there is to teach them to listen instead of talking all the time, right? So there's actually a lot of things that we can start working on tomorrow that has to do with everything we can already. We know this. We know what it means to be more transparent. We know what it means to show openness and vulnerability when we interact with our stakeholders. And we know and we can support and facilitate more real dialogue and listening in our organizations, internally and externally. That we can start exercising, tomorrow.
hmm? Thank you
And
for
if
that.
I can add one thing to it, I read this headline a while ago and it really stuck with me. And the headline was "Cool to be Kind." And it was the whole article was about how kindness is such an important part of empathy, but it's also one of those things that kindness allows people to be vulnerable. And Pele, you talked at the start of our webinar about, social media and distrust and what have you, and but also then looking at the positivity of the other side of it. And sometimes,
Mm,
you read the comments from people, and these
mm,
can be in your internal social media or just
mm,
generally externally too, where you have a mix of unkind comments, which show a lack of empathy for a person, but then you have an outpouring of support and you have kindness and sympathy, and that reinforces your view of humanity, that there's a lot of people out there who are kind and who are empathetic. And I think if we can model those behaviors and we can encourage our leaders to model those behaviors, to ignore the ones who will comment negatively and focus on the ones who are kind themselves and demonstrate empathy, I think it increases their chances of being vulnerable, because
mm,
nobody wants to read the unkind words. But I think if we remind ourselves that kindness is really the ultimate gift that we could give somebody, it allows people to be more transparent and vulnerable in the situations that warrant them to do so.
Hmm? And then I I like what you say, Maliha. We also had a comment, and maybe it's another situation, but thus a situation that many advisors are in. That how do you deal with power relations as PR professionals in your organization, particularly when we have leaders who only want to hear themselves. So,
and that is extremely well said, and is very that is a difficult topic. And that is actually what I meant when I said that sometimes this is not something that we can do only as ourselves. We can try to stand in this power room and be stronger, but I really think that this is where we need to lift. As as a branch. As communication professionals, to build the right structures. To empower communicators around the world to be stronger when they interact in these relations with senior management. And because I agree, in that relation, you can only do so much if you want to keep your job.
Yeah, but I think you also find the champions. I remember there was this company I worked for many years ago, and the CEO was very much like that, where it was about what they wanted to say. But the advice that I got from their executive assistant was, maybe you should talk to so and so because the CEO always listens to them. And so I think for us, it's also about identifying champions or advocates inside the organization who we could approach and share not so much our concerns, but our approach, and help ask them to help us advise the senior leader that we're dealing with to address it, so that it's not about, well, Malia says I need to do this, but it's about the collective view. And so if you can find out who that leader is most likely to listen to, because there's always someone they're most likely to listen to, you can get that individual's advice on how to approach the situation. And that's not to say they have to do it for you, but I think their advice and perspective can help you adjust your approach in the right way.
Thank you so much. And to bring the whole session to a close, please think about one advice you would like to give to all who are participating in today's session. There's one comment about in this speedy world we are in now, kindness, which you said an important part of empathy, is very much ignored. And I think that you are fully right. We are two colleagues working in resonance communication, and we definitely believe that what everyone needs is resonance. So we can't change the acceleration of society, but we can definitely change how we approach the world. So that is what I would, give an advice. Not saying that it's easy, but it becomes more optimistic when you actually feel like that you are working on improving the world and not just trying to solve what is out there. So
Yeah, and also I think it doesn't matter how other people behave. It's always about how you behave. And if you see the world in a positive way, you will always see the positive lights that come out of individual situations. And I think for me, I always try to live my world and my life with kindness and positivity, and I surround myself with it. And so for me, when I scroll through TikTok, I call it joy scrolling because my feed is full of joyful things, because that's what attracts you. Because if you look for things, you will find the things that you're looking for.
even on TikTok, thank you.
Even on TikTok.
Thank you for that advice. Pelle, do you have an advice?
No, I really think that we have a lot that we can contribute with in the world that we are in today. From the way that we choose our angle in the next article that we write to the next meeting with the senior managers that we participate in. So I think just give it a thought. Just give it a thought that we can contribute with more transparency, with more dialogue. And the more we can facilitate this, that way we can change the world but with small steps. So culture change when people change, right? and culture is the sum of many small actions. So even small actions matters.
Thank you so much. And let that be the final word. Even small step matters. Thank you so much to everyone for listening in. The whole webinar has been recorded and will be shared on the Global Alliance website tomorrow. So feel free to revisit it again or share it with friends. Thank you so much and have a fantastic day.
Thank you, Anders.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, Malia. And thank you, Mateus.